In the previous video, we discovered that the word terrorism can have many different meanings and that there's a dispute about how to define the term. In this video, we're going to look into the reasons why it's so difficult to formulate a generally accepted definition of terrorism. And these difficulties are best explained by Alex Schmid, one of the leading scholars in the field of terrorism and counter-terrorism studies. And he provides us with 4 reasons explaining difficulties in defining terrorism. Let's have a look at these 4 reasons. Schmid notes that terrorism is a contested concept, and political, legal, social science and popular notions are often diverging. And the second reason is that the definition question is linked to legitimization and delegitimization and criminalization of certain groups. And then the third reason why it's so difficult to get to a generally accepted definition is that there are many different types of terrorism, each with a different form or manifestation. And finally, the fourth reason is that the term has undergone changes in meaning in more than 200 years of its existence. Well, let us now look at each of these 4 reasons. So terrorism is a contested concept. What does that mean? I think it's best explained by looking at the phrase, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Well, here you see 6 faces of persons that are associated with terrorism, a freedom struggle, or other types of political violence by non-state actors. Do you recognize any of them? On the top row, from left to right, you see the face of Yasser Arafat, the leader, or the former leader of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, who has been considered a terrorist by some, but who also holds a Nobel Peace Prize. And in the middle you see the face of Abdullah Öcalan, the leader of the Kurdish Workers' Party, the PKK, from Turkey, who's regarded an arch enemy by the Turkish authorities. He's also in jail, but he's also considered a hero by many people with a Kurdish background. A hero, a freedom fighter. And then on the right-hand side you see the face of Osama bin Laden, the former leader of Al-Qaeda. And the row below you see, first of all on the left-hand side, a picture of Che Guevara. A revolutionary left-wing activist, militant, terrorist, freedom fighter. Many labels you could use. In those days, in the 50s and 60s, very few would call him a terrorist. They would maybe label him as a revolutionary, as a rebel. But today I think many people would label it quite differently if he would do these kind of things today. And then in the middle you see the face of the leader of the Tamil Tigers. You see also the flag with a tiger on it. The former leader, I should say, he has been killed a couple of years ago. And he was the leader of an organization that was fighting the Sri Lankan authorities with the aim to create an independent state. Some would say a classical example of separatist nationalist terrorists. Others might say a freedom fighter. And then on the right-hand side you see the face of Anders Breivik, the man who killed almost 80 people in Norway a couple of years ago. With a right-wing anti-Islam ideology, what is he? A terrorist? A freedom fighter? Something else? The second reason of Alex Schmid is related to the process of delegitimization and criminalization of certain groups. A good example of this is putting certain groups on lists of designated terrorist organizations, which means that if you are on such a list, you're considered a criminal organization with a wide range of consequences. It ranges from freezing the assets of the organization to possible arrests of its membership. The United Nations has such a list, and so do, amongst others, the United States and the European Union. Well, here you have the example of the United States and the European Union. Have a look at it. We'll make sure that there's also a list provided on the course dashboard. And you see that it has a wide range of groups. You can see Al-Qaeda on it, the earlier mentioned Kurdish workers' parties, the Aum sect from Japan, as well as the Tamil Tigers. Repeatedly, there's pressure upon governments and international organizations to put a certain group on a list or to delist another. Well, the latter is much less frequent than the lobby of all kinds of groups and politicians to add a certain group on a certain list. Well, one organization that has been repeatedly confronted with calls to be put on the EU list of designated terrorist organizations is the Lebanese organization Hezbollah, a Shiite militant group and political party. People who are in favor of this point at the alleged involvement in violent activities by Hezbollah in and outside Lebanon. They point, for instance, at a terrorist attack on Israeli tourists in Bulgaria, and also point at the fact that Hezbollah is allegedly involved in all kinds of violence in the Middle East, including Syria. In July 2013, as a result of this pressure, the European Union decided to put the military wing of Hezbollah on its list of designated terrorist organizations. Well, I'm sure that there's a lot of disagreement among you. Some say it's a good thing that the military wing of Hezbollah was put on the list, while others say it's a bad thing because they think Hezbollah is not a terrorist organization. Well, it shows how difficult it is to define terrorism. The third explanation for a lack of a generally accepted definition of terrorism is the fact that there are many types of terrorism, each with a different form and manifestation. Well, here you see a list of Europol, European Union's law enforcement agency that distinguishes 5 different groups based on ideology. They talk about religious-inspired terrorism, which is distinct from ethno-nationalist and separatist terrorism. And then you have left-wing and anarchist groups, as well as right-wing groups. And then the 5th category is what they call single issue. Certain groups or individuals that actually fight for one thing. For instance, that they fight for animal rights or they fight against abortion. A list based on ideology. But what about individuals with no clear ideology? Unfortunately, in the Netherlands, we have been confronted with a person who drove his car into a crowd, killing 7 people because he wanted to attack the Queen who was visiting a town in the Netherlands. And his last words were, "I did it on purpose. Willem-Alexander, who is currently our king," he said, "is a fascist, is a racist, and I knew the Queen would be there." How to label such an incident? Terrorism or not? And what about states? Why is state terrorism not one of the categories of Europol? We'll come back to that important question later on. The 4th reason why it's so difficult to define terrorism is the fact that the word has undergone changes in meaning in the more than 200 years of its existence. The term terrorism has changed its semantic focus several times, and it was originally used to describe the reign of terror by the authorities after the French Revolution. And the term terrorist was not used in anti-government sense before the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century. And we already gave the example of the assassination of President McKinley. In the newspapers the next day, they didn't use the word terrorism. And then today, I think it would be unthinkable that the killing of a United States president would not be labeled as a terrorist act. And think of the reactions after the attacks on 9/11. Here you see a number of examples. The word used in the headlines of the newspapers the following day included a wide variety of words: war, attack, infamy, but above all the words terror and terrorism. These examples show the changes in meaning of the word terrorism in its 200 years of existence. And it makes sense, because also terrorism itself, the act, has changed the nature and the phase of the phenomenon are also profoundly different from, let's say, 200 years ago. Why is there no generally accepted definition of terrorism? Alex Schmid gave 4 reasons. Terrorism is a contested concept, and it's linked to the delegitimization and criminalization of certain groups. And then there are many different types of terrorism. And finally, the meaning of the word has undergone changes in more than 200 years of its existence. In the next video, we're going to argue why it's so important to have a definition of terrorism and look at a number of attempts to arrive at one.